Hello, Need to Know today leaves the field of high policy and looks at something that affects every single teacher every working day, the school workforce reforms. How is the workforce agreement working? Are all teachers getting their PPA time? Today we're talking to my namesake, but no relation, Stephen Baker, Director of Remodelling from the Training and Development Agency.
There's an annual survey, covers about 2,000 teachers, and it's shown us that over the past 4 years, the numbers of primary school teachers, for example, who are saying that what they do in the classroom is really what they've been trained to do, has increased by 25%. For secondary teachers, it's increased by 45%. So we have got some good news there.
We will hear from a cross-section of staff at one school about their working entitlements.
Since workforce reform has started over the last 4 years, without a shadow of a doubt, the situation for teachers has improved quite markedly.
I find that very hard. I find it hard to understand how anybody negotiating a workforce agreement ever thought that was going to be a fair arrangement.
And we'll be hearing from some of the teaching unions.
What we think is important is the entitlement of children to be taught by qualified teachers and the entitlement of teachers to have sufficient time to be able to do the job properly.
Where I would like to see push is on the workload of head teachers. That has grown exponentially, and the Secretary of State appears to be entirely silent about that.
But first, let's go back to January 2003 when Raising Standards and Tackling Workload, a national agreement, was signed by school workforce unions, local government employers and the government. So, Stephen, just tell us really, what were the overall aims when we started out on this journey for workforce agreement?
Well, the aims are enshrined in the title, raising standards and tackling workload. But it's also about improving the professionalisation of teachers, having teachers focus more on their core skills, having teachers freed to teach.
The changes outlined in the workforce agreement were to be introduced in phases. The first reforms from September 2003 covered the introduction of work-life balance, the creation of leadership and management time for those with extra responsibilities, and the delegation of routine administrative and clerical tasks.
It was about getting teachers and head teachers to focus on their core responsibilities for teaching and learning. And it was about creating capacity and stripping away from them tasks that actually didn't need the skills and abilities of qualified teachers.
The second phase of the workforce agreement from September 2004 brought in a new limit of 38 hours a year for the amount of time teachers could be expected to cover for absent colleagues. Just explain really why this cover limit was needed.
Well, teachers in the past had spent a lot of time covering absences of other teachers. It was important to get teachers focused instead on their own professional development, on giving them time to spend on planning and preparation, assessment of pupils' work, and also to make sure that teachers weren't overworked so that morale, retention and recruitment issues would be addressed.
In terms of cover, of course, the 38 hours was what the government said would be an absolute maximum, and every school should be working towards reducing it so that no teacher would be used for cover except in extremis. So we are really trying to make sure that no schools are just routinely using teachers in the way that they have.
From September 2009, there will be a new expectation that teachers should only be expected to cover rarely. But bought-in supply cover is expensive. Does this present a problem for a school like King's Langley?
The onus is from September 2009 that really teachers should be doing hardly any cover at all. Well, I don't mind admitting that that's going to create a lot of difficulties for this particular school.
Every time a colleague is off sick, that's £200. Every time a colleague goes out on a trip, that's £200 for supply. That very, very quickly mounts up, and it doesn't seem to me to be a sustainable situation.
It is difficult. Some people don't do their 38 or 39 subject covers a year. Others do more, and some do, dead on the right amount.
The third phase of the workforce agreement came in from September 2005. It heralded the introduction of dedicated headship time. It ended the expectation that teachers would be used to invigilate external exams. And it brought in guaranteed time for planning, preparation and assessment. So, Stephen, PPA time, is it just about reducing teachers' workload and their hours?
No, it's really about improving quality of teaching. Teachers now have time to spend often working with colleagues in planning for lessons, preparing materials. They're also able to spend more time looking at the individual progress of pupils through assessment, and they can plan that into their teaching. So it's not just about tackling workload, it is about raising standards and improving the quality of teaching.
What's the view of Chris Keats about PPA time?
In all but 13 schools in the whole country, PPA time was put in place. What's happened subsequently is that some of that time's been eroded away, and that's the problem we're facing at the moment. It hasn't been given the priority and status in the timetable in some schools that it should have been.
One of the things about PPA time is that we are prepared to accept that it's a step in the right direction, but NUT policy for a long time has been that teachers need 20% release from their classroom duties.
But what if a head and governing body fail to provide the minimum of 10% PPA time or demand excessive cover from their staff?
My understanding about PPA time is it is statutory anyway, and what I get from our members is that they are bending over backwards to make sure that teachers have that entitlement, and also that they don't have to do photocopying and mounting work on walls and things like that.
Recently, the School Secretary Ed Balls promised to take a tougher line on schools that fail to offer the minimum PPA time.
With PPA, I think that it should be the power of law that is brought in to enforce the fact that we have our PPA time just for our PPA staff.
I think on occasions, when you have a statutory requirement, it removes professional flexibility.
It is incredibly important that we do get our PPA time, because otherwise we are taking work home in the evenings and at weekends.
My personal view, I'm quite opposed to legislation that reduces flexibility in the whole within the working environment. I think the mindset for teaching is that the job's got to be done.
Do the teaching unions think the big stick of the law is really necessary to ensure PPA time is delivered?
PPA time and in fact all the provisions of the National Agreement are statutory. They're in teachers' conditions of service. What Ed Balls has done is seeking to enforce those provisions in schools.
What I'm getting from my colleagues is that they're losing some of their leadership and management time, so that teachers in their school have their PPA time, which is the reverse of what the Secretary of State appears to think.
Now, if you've got your head around the phrase workforce agreement, I'm afraid there's another of these rather abstract terms that you need to understand as well. It is remodelling.
Remodelling is a process for schools to adapt to and to manage change. Basically, schools have a set of tools and techniques that they get the whole school staff involved in using to design or to redesign what the school staff structure will look like.
I think the whole business of remodelling is a continuous process. You know, I think you hear some people say that it's now happened and the statutory bits are in place, but it's a continuous process.
I think the workforce reforms were a great opportunity for us to revisit the structure and the way we work in the school, and we really grasped that opportunity.
We're going to, by agreement, and I think...
The restructuring really took the form of creating learning areas rather than departments, and so we were able to have slightly more multidisciplinary teams than we had before, and I think it gave us the opportunity to look at the support that teachers had. One of the things that hasn't really worked in terms of the remodelling agenda is just the sheer number of hours that teachers are working.
So let's hear what remodelling means in practice for one head teacher.
I can't quite remember the genesis of workforce reform and remodelling. Its principle is absolutely sound. Let's give teachers more time to focus on teaching and learning and develop paraprofessional roles for other things. But the way in which these changes are then policed by people being employed on behalf of DCSF to look termly at whether the local authorities are making good progress on workforce reform or extended schools agenda, and tick box returns to police all these very good ideas in a completely ridiculous way is such a waste of scarce national resources, and it'd be much better put into frontline work to get better joined up services, for example.
Alongside all the changes under the Workforce Agreement, schools also have to follow the recently revised arrangements about performance management, which cover the assessment of the overall job being done by a teacher or head.
Performance management is a formal framework that allows teachers and head teachers to be able to plan their career development, to be able to progress, and also to be able to identify the types of professional development that they need in order to improve their skills and to help them in the task of teaching and learning.
Now, there have been some recently revised arrangements on performance management. Can you just tell us what they amount to?
What they amount to is an entitlement for teachers to have performance management arrangements, an entitlement for objectives to be set and agreed, and also crucially an entitlement to the support and the development that would be needed in order to meet those objectives.
Of course, it is easy enough to lay down the entitlement to performance management, but in reality, how high does it figure on head teachers' day-to-day agendas, especially at primary level where staff resources can be limited?
When I fall out with a friend, I make up by sometimes making a joke of it. I would have liked to have more support with becoming a deputy and taking on that role. There didn't seem to be a lot around, but the performance management I've had in school has allowed me to at least share those needs and concerns with my head, who's then been able to provide what she can.
We're just about to do some review of what the impact's been 12 months into the revised performance management arrangements. The feedback that we're getting from members is that people are now working the system in terms of all the elements are in place, but the quality of that experience is at the moment very difficult to judge.
So, Stephen, is continuing professional development, is that now an absolute entitlement for every teacher?
Every teacher has an entitlement to CPD. What's more important, in a sense, is making sure that that CPD is quality.
And what do the unions think of the importance of the entitlement of CPD for their members?
I don't think we're anywhere near getting to the point where people even recognise that CPD should be an entitlement for staff and that it actually makes the most essential contribution to raising standards.
Teaching is, for most people who enter the profession, a lifelong commitment. So it's perfectly obvious that people will need to upskill themselves or reskill themselves or, change the things that they know over a period of time. So it's very important that teachers have access to high quality professional development.
Well, that's it for this edition of Need to Know on Teachers' Working Lives. My thanks to Stephen Baker and everyone else who's contributed to this programme. For more detail on working entitlements, go to our Teachers TV website at www.teachers.tv. And now I'm off for a bit of work-life balance of my own. Goodbye.